He lost everything and fell asleep on a freezing bus stop bench. But when a mysterious German shepherd sat beside him and howled into the night, his darkest secret came roaring back to life. Was this a chance encounter? Or the ghost of a loyalty he thought was buried forever? Here's what happened, but before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. The night pressed down harder than the biting cold, each gust of wind slicing through the fabric of Vincent's jacket like 1,000 tiny knives. He exhaled a slow, trembling breath, watching the vapor twist and disappear into the darkness above. Somewhere beyond the high rises and the indifferent glow of neon signs, life went on untouched by his sorrow. Couples laughed over candlelit dinners. Children dreamed safely beneath warm blankets. And the city's elite clinked their glasses high above the streets where he now called home. But here at this forgotten corner of Fifth Avenue, Vincent sat as if anchored to his failures, the weight of regret heavier than the badge around his neck. His calloused fingers traced the edges of the worn photograph he couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring himself to let go of either. Titan had been more than a partner. He'd been a brother in fur, a guardian when the world grew too loud, and the only soul who never turned away when Vincent's mistakes came crashing down like a tidal wave. He swallowed hard, the taste of cheap whiskey still clinging to his tongue, the only thing dull enough to silence the memories clawing at his mind. The flashbacks came without mercy. Titan charging into a burning warehouse to pull a child to safety, standing between Vincent and a gunman's raised weapon, his fierce eyes unwavering, even in the face of death. And then, the worst memory of all, standing over Titan's grave, the rain washing over his trembling hands as the city moved on without them. That moment had broken something inside him that no promotion, no commendation, no hollow words of comfort could ever repair. The streets became his penance, the endless nights his confession booth. But tonight felt different. The air carried a strange tension, like the city itself was holding its breath. Vincent glanced up at the flickering street lamp overhead, the electrical buzz nearly drowned out by the distant wail of a siren fading into the night. He hunched further into his jacket, pulling his collar tight against the creeping chill that seemed to seep straight into his bones. And as his eyelids grew heavy, that photograph clutched tight against his chest, a single question echoed through his weary mind. How did everything slip away so fast? With a final glance at the empty streets, his head dipped forward, surrendering to exhaustion. Little did he know that on this very night, under the haunting glow of that broken streetlight, destiny was already on the move. And before the sun would rise again, the echoes of a bond thought long buried would come howling back to life. The sound didn't just fill the air, it seemed to split the night wide open, a raw, aching cry that made Vincent's heart pound against his ribs like it was trying to claw its way free. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, that the exhaustion and whiskey had finally blurred the lines between memory and reality, but as the mist swirled and the figure stepped closer, every nerve in his body snapped awake. The German shepherd moved with a grace that belied the weight of the world it seemed to carry on its broad shoulders, its coat matted and dusted with grime. But its eyes, God, those eyes. They were the color of old whiskey and heartbreak, the same haunted look Titan used to wear after long, brutal nights on patrol, as if he had seen things no creature should ever have to witness. Vincent sat frozen, his breath caught in his throat, his mind racing through impossible thoughts. The dog's paws made no sound against the cracked concrete as it approached, its head held low, but its gaze never faltering. And when it sat beside him, pressing its lean body against his side, as if it belonged there, as if it had always belonged there, something inside Vincent broke loose. He could feel the tremor in his hands, the tightness in his chest threatening to crush him under the weight of emotions he hadn't let surface in years. Then came the second howl, a sound even more sorrowful than the first, and this time it felt like the universe itself was grieving right alongside them. Vincent reached out, hesitating only for a heartbeat before his fingers found coarse fur beneath the grime, warm and solid and very, very real. The dog didn't flinch. It didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into his touch, a quiet sigh escaping its muzzle as if it had finally found the place it had been searching for through endless nights and empty streets. Vincent's voice cracked when he whispered, "Where did you come from, boy?" But the dog only closed its eyes and rested its head against his knee, as if the answer didn't matter. And maybe it didn't. Maybe what mattered was that in this vast, indifferent city, two lost souls had found each other at their lowest point, the minutes, dragged into hours, and neither of them moved. Together they sat under the flickering street lamp as the world passed them by, the connection between them forged in shared silence and unspoken pain. And as dawn's first light crept over the horizon, painting the mist in soft gold and pink, Vincent realized this night wasn't a curse. It was the beginning of something he thought he'd lost forever. Something he wasn't sure he deserved but desperately needed. A reason to believe. A reason to keep going. And in that fragile moment, with a battered dog at his side and hope flickering to life in his chest for the first time in years, Vincent knew this was no ordinary night. This was a night that would change everything. That tear traced a slow path down his cracked skin, vanishing into the rough stubble of his jaw. But it felt like a dam had broken behind it. Years of held back regret and guilt flooding through the fragile cracks of a man who had learned long ago that showing weakness was dangerous. But here, in the presence of this silent sentinel, this ghost in flesh and bone, Vincent found himself drowning in emotions he thought had been buried with Titan beneath that marble headstone draped in a folded flag. The dog shifted closer, its body pressing firmly against his side, its head lifting just enough to meet his eyes again. And in that gaze, Vincent saw 1,000 unspoken words, a loyalty unearned but freely given, a bond forged not by time but by shared sorrow. His fingers finally found the courage to move, running along the dog's thick neck, feeling the wiry strength beneath the grime, the faint outline of muscles trained for discipline, not chaos. There was no collar, no name tag, but this wasn't some lost stray. This was a soldier, out of place, a warrior, abandoned by fate, just as he had been. The night air grew heavier, as if the city itself had paused to witness the reunion of two broken souls. And for the briefest moment, Vincent swore he could smell Titan's scent, clean leather, gun oil, and the faint, earthy musk that had always filled his patrol car. His heart clenched painfully, a sharp reminder of every moment he'd let slip away, every "I'm fine" he'd muttered through gritted teeth, every time he'd chosen the job over the life waiting beyond his badge. And as the city's first light began to stretch its pale fingers through the fog, Vincent whispered a name he hadn't spoken in years. Titan. His voice cracked, hopeful and hopeless all at once. The dog's ears twitched at the name, its eyes softening, and for a heartbeat that felt like eternity, Vincent believed in miracles. But then reality returned like a cruel wind. And he knew this wasn't Titan. Yet somehow, it didn't matter. This dog, this living, breathing echo of everything he'd lost, was here now. And that had to mean something. Maybe it was fate or some divine mercy reaching out one last time before he gave in to the shadows completely. As the dog rested its head on his knee again, Vincent looked up at the empty skyline and took a breath deeper than he had in years. The weight hadn't lifted, but it had shifted, as if he no longer had to carry it alone. And in that fragile dawn, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the raw ache of his present, Vincent found something he thought he'd never feel again. A spark of purpose, faint but undeniable, burning quietly beneath the ashes of his broken life. The city stirred to life around them. The sharp hiss of bus brakes, the distant clatter of subway trains beneath their feet, the smell of fresh bread wafting from a bakery that opened too early for a world that never really slept. Vincent moved through it all like a ghost, his hands shoved deep into his worn jacket pockets, the edges of his mind still frayed from a night that felt more like a fever dream than reality. But every time he glanced to his side, there the dog was, silent, poised, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings like a soldier on patrol. Vincent walked faster, testing the strange bond, cutting left down an alley littered with yesterday's regrets. But the dog matched him perfectly. A living shadow, every muscle moving in harmony with his own. He paused by a rusted dumpster, half expecting the dog to bolt toward the promise of discarded scraps, but instead, the animal sat back on its haunches and watched him with the same intensity Titan used to have during stakeouts. It made no sense, but somehow it made all the sense in the world. With a resigned sigh, Vincent muttered, "Suit yourself, partner," his voice rough with disuse and something dangerously close to affection. They moved through the forgotten veins of the city that day, slipping between the cracks of a society too busy to notice the broken pieces it left behind. In the abandoned rail yard, where the graffiti told stories louder than sirens, they found a moment's peace. Vincent sat on the cold steel of an overturned freight container, and the dog curled at his feet, head resting on massive paws, eyes never fully closing but never leaving Vincent for long. Hours passed like that, the sun arcing overhead, casting long shadows across cracked pavement and rusted tracks. Vincent talked then, his voice low and rough, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Stories of his years on the force, the cases that went cold, the faces he couldn't forget. And the one moment that shattered everything when a child's life slipped through his fingers and no amount of justice could piece it back together. And through it all, the dog listened, not with pity or judgment, but with the steady, unwavering presence of someone who simply refused to leave. By dusk, as the city lights flickered to life like 1,000 distant stars, Vincent rose to his feet, his bones aching with the weight of the past and the miles they'd walked. The dog stood too, no command given, none needed. Vincent stared at the skyline, glowing against the darkening sky, and whispered to the night, "Maybe we're both just looking for a way home." The dog's ears twitched, a soft huff of breath rising from its chest, and together they turned toward whatever the night held, two battered souls moving as one, their unspoken bond stronger than the silence that surrounded them. The days bled together in a rhythm only the lost understood, each morning a repeat of the last, each night a silent confession under the indifferent glow of street lamps. But through it all, Echo remained at his side, a living reminder of everything Vincent had buried beneath years of regret and whiskey-soaked nights. Echo wasn't just a companion. He was a mirror, reflecting the man Vincent had once been and the soldier he feared he'd never become again. The way Echo moved through the city was something out of muscle memory. Silent paws across broken glass without a sound, sharp ears twitching at the faintest noise, eyes always scanning like he was guarding something sacred, even if that something was just a broken old man trying to outrun his own past. Vincent caught himself speaking commands he hadn't used in over a decade. Simple things like stay, watch, or heal. And each time, Echo responded with the precision of a soldier reporting for duty. There was no hesitation, no confusion, just immediate, disciplined obedience that told Vincent everything he needed to know. Echo wasn't a stray. He was trained, molded by hands that had either loved him deeply or used him for things too dark to name. And that haunted Vincent more than he cared to admit. On the nights when the weight of his sins pressed too hard against his chest, Vincent would sit against the cold brick walls of forgotten alleyways, the city's neon heartbeat pulsing dimly above, and he would talk. Words he hadn't spoken aloud in years spilled into the air like smoke, curling up toward the heavens as if hoping for forgiveness. He told Echo about Titan, about the first day they met, when Titan refused to sit in the back of the cruiser and instead planted himself in the passenger seat like he belonged there. He spoke of the long nights working cases that never seemed to end, of back alley busts and last minute saves, of the time Titan took a bullet meant for him and lived to see another day, limping but proud. And then, when his voice cracked and his eyes grew distant, he whispered about the case he couldn't close, the Sullivan kid, a missing child swallowed whole by the city's underbelly, a case that unraveled everything Vincent believed in. It cost him his badge, his marriage, and the last thread of hope he'd been clinging to. And through every word, Echo just sat there, eyes locked on Vincent's, and never judging, never turning away, as if he understood every broken syllable. It was in those quiet, vulnerable moments that Vincent realized something terrifying and beautiful. Echo wasn't just a companion, he was a living echo of loyalty, a second chance at redemption walking beside him on four legs. And for the first time in years, as the cold crept in and the city hummed around them, Vincent felt the faintest spark of something he thought had died long ago: hope. The rain hammered down like a relentless confession, each drop pounding against the skeletal remains of the old train station, as if the heavens themselves demanded absolution. Vincent sat hunched beneath the fractured beams, the rusted iron groaning above with every violent gust of wind, his threadbare jacket soaked through but long past caring about discomfort. Echo sat motionless at his side, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the stations. Crumbling arches, every muscle tight, as if the night itself held a secret just out of reach. That's when the newspaper came skittering across the wet concrete like some cursed messenger, its edges torn and curling as the wind pushed it against Vincent's leg. At first he ignored it, assuming it was nothing more than yesterday's forgotten tragedies. But something, a cold shiver not born of the rain, made him look down. His heart seized when his eyes locked onto the headline, bold and merciless against the blurred ink. New leads in cold case, the Sullivan child disappearance. The words felt like a fist to his chest, knocking the air clean out of his lungs. Time unraveled right there in that forgotten station, dragging him back to the day it all fell apart. The day the Sullivan boy vanished without a trace, and Vincent's badge, his reputation, and the last shred of his dignity were lost to the case that would haunt him every waking moment since. His hands trembled as he reached for the damp paper, his eyes devouring the text even as the rain smudged the words into a cruel blur. The Sullivan child. New evidence. A possible suspect resurfaced. His mind raced faster than his heart, each word cutting deeper than the last. And beside him, Echo stood abruptly, his ears sharp and alert, his body tense like a coiled spring. It was as if Echo felt the gravity of that name, as if he could sense the unresolved storm raging inside Vincent's chest. For a moment, Vincent simply sat there, the paper clenched in his fists, his breath shallow, his eyes burning with memories too vivid to silence. He saw the mother's face again, pale and hollowed by grief, the look in her eyes when he told her they had nothing, no leads, no hope. He remembered the sharp sting of his captain's words, the courtroom of public opinion that crucified him without mercy, the headlines that painted him a failure, the man who couldn't save a child. But tonight, with Echo standing before him, like some sentinel of fate, Vincent felt something stir beneath the years of regret and self-loathing. Purpose, raw, painful, and undeniable, lit a fire in his veins he thought had long since burned out. He rose slowly, the newspaper crumpling in his grip, his eyes locking with Echo's. "We're not done," he whispered hoarsely, his voice rough from disuse but laced with a conviction he hadn't known in years. Echo gave a low, rumbling growl and stepped forward into the rain, his body poised for a mission he didn't need to be asked to accept. And as Vincent followed him out into the storm, he realized this wasn't just about redemption anymore. This was about finishing what should have never been left undone. The city had a different face at night, a colder one, beneath the thin mask of neon and noise. And as Vincent moved through its back streets with Echo at his side, it felt less like returning to familiar ground and more like stepping into a battlefield he barely recognized. His mind burned with fragments of old files and half remembered testimonies, threads that had unraveled too fast back then, but now they felt like a map etched deep into his bones. He revisited places he swore he'd never set foot in again. The crumbling tenements on Monroe Street where whispers died behind locked doors, the graffiti-scarred underpasses where deals were made in the shadows, the bars where lowlifes clung to their secrets tighter than their shot glasses. And through it all, Echo moved like he belonged to the darkness, his head low, eyes sharp, instincts leading them down paths Vincent would have walked past without a second glance. There were moments when Vincent felt like he was chasing ghosts, his footsteps retracing a trail too cold and too broken. But then Echo would stop dead, ears pricked, nose lifting to the air, as if the past itself left a scent only he could find. That's how they found the old warehouse off Pier 17, a place long condemned and supposedly empty. Yet Echo stood at its rusted entrance, growling low and deep, his body stiff, his gaze locked on a set of fresh footprints in the mud. Footprints leading to a hidden door tucked behind a fallen stack of rotting crates. Vincent's pulse thundered in his ears as he pushed the door open, its hinges groaning like a dying man's last breath. And inside, dust danced through the beam of his flashlight, illuminating a scene untouched by time, but not by guilt. Old furniture covered in sheets, empty liquor bottles lined against the wall, and a corkboard stained yellow with age, covered in photos. Photos of the Sullivan boy, candid shots from school, from a playground, one haunting picture of him crying beside a broken toy. Vincent's breath hitched, his knees almost buckling beneath the crushing weight of what he was seeing. This was no random dump site. This was a shrine, a sick trophy room for a predator who had remained hidden while the city forgot. Echo moved ahead, his nose to the floor, his tail rigid like a spear, and in the corner of the room, he began to paw at a section of the rotting floorboards. Vincent knelt, his fingers trembling as he peeled them back to reveal a small box wrapped in faded cloth. Inside were personal effects. Small things, but each one a dagger to Vincent's already battered soul. A child's bracelet, a toy soldier missing its head, a locket engraved with the initials JS. It wasn't just a conspiracy anymore. It was a roadmap of evil hiding in plain sight. And as Vincent stood, his fists clenched and eyes blazing against the tears he refused to shed, he knew one thing. This time he wouldn't fail. Not with Echo at his side, not again. The storm howled through the skeletal remains of the shipyard, rain slashing sideways as if the heavens themselves were trying to drown out the sins hidden beneath the rotting timbers. Vincent pulled his collar high against the biting wind, his heart pounding louder than the thunder that cracked across the night sky. Echo moved ahead, his sleek body low to the ground, every muscle coiled tight as a drawn wire, his nose to the wet earth, tracking something invisible to human senses, but undeniable in its presence. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the broken pier like a forgotten graveyard. And in that split second, Vincent saw it, the jagged outline of a crawl space beneath the crumbling dock. Without hesitation, Echo lunged toward it, his paws scraping against the slick boards as he disappeared into the shadows. Vincent dropped to his knees, ignoring the cold water seeping through his pants as he crawled in after him, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air beneath the pier was thick with rot and the sickening scent of mold and rusted iron. But beneath it all was something far more familiar. Fear. Echo's low growl rumbled ahead, guiding Vincent through the claustrophobic space until his fingers brushed against cold stone, and then something softer, something that made his skin crawl. His flashlight flickered to life, its weak beam cutting through the oppressive dark. and the sight that unfolded before him stole the breath straight from his lungs. There, in a hidden chamber no bigger than a child's bedroom, were the remnants of a stolen life. A small, tattered backpack, a pair of worn sneakers far too small for any adult, and scattered across the damp floor were toys, each one carefully placed, as if waiting for their owner to return. But the walls held the worst of it. Scrawled across the cracked concrete in faded, dripping red paint were the words that made Vincent's blood run cold. Some bonds can't be broken. Echo's mournful howl echoed through the chamber, a sound so raw it felt as though the earth itself mourned alongside them. But before the sorrow could fully settle, a low, deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel cut through the storm. Vincent's heart seized as he killed the flashlight, the chamber plunging back into darkness. Echo turned toward the sound, his body rigid, his growl deepening into something primal. Vincent pressed his back against the cold wall, straining to hear over the roar of the storm, his mind racing through every scenario, every mistake that had led to this final moment. The footsteps grew closer, slow and purposeful, each step a declaration that whoever was out there had no intention of hiding anymore. And in that darkness, as the rain poured, and the past threatened to crush him beneath its weight, Vincent knew this was it. The reckoning he'd been running from. The final confrontation written in the blood and tears of every life touched by the horrors he failed to stop. And with Echo at his side, standing guard against the approaching storm, Vincent braced himself for whatever nightmare was about to step out of the shadows. The storm raged on, lightning ripping the sky apart as if the heavens themselves demanded justice. And in that blinding flash of light, Vincent saw the face he thought was lost to the darkness of forgotten crimes. Elias Kane. A ghost from a case that had never let him sleep. Kane looked older, his face hollowed by years of hiding. But those eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly remorseless, held the same cruel gleam Vincent remembered. From the interrogation room all those years ago, Kane stepped forward slowly, his hands half raised in mock surrender, but Vincent knew better. He saw the slight twitch of Kane's fingers, the practiced shift of weight that spoke of a weapon hidden close. Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs, but before instinct could scream a warning, Echo was already in motion, a streak of muscle and fury cutting through the gloom with terrifying precision. Kane barely had time to draw before Echo collided with him, jaws snapping inches from his throat, forcing the weapon to the ground with a metallic clatter lost beneath the roar of thunder. Vincent moved on pure muscle memory, his body remembering every takedown, every hold he thought he'd forgotten. He was on Kane in an instant, driving him into the cold, slick concrete with the practiced efficiency of a man who had lived too many years in the line of fire. Kane struggled, his breath ragged, his voice spitting venom and half-formed threats. But Vincent barely heard them over the blood pounding in his ears. Echo stood just beyond them, his body rigid, teeth bared, every growl a promise that if Kane so much as twitched, there would be no hesitation. For a moment, the storm seemed to fade, the world narrowing to the weight of Vincent's hands pressing Kane's face into the ground, and the realization that this nightmare was finally over. When the distant wail of sirens pierced the air, Vincent didn't move. He held Kane there, every muscle tight with years of pent-up failure, his breathing harsh and uneven until the flashing lights cut through the storm and uniformed officers spilled into the forgotten chamber. Hands grabbed Kane, dragging him to his feet, and as the evidence was collected, those small, tragic relics of a stolen life, Vincent stood in the center of it all, soaked to the bone, his fists trembling not from rage but from the unbearable lightness of release. For the first time in years, the crushing weight that had lived on his chest like a second heart began to lift. As Kane was dragged away, cursing and defeated, Vincent turned to Echo, who sat quietly now, his chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. his mission complete. Vincent knelt, resting a heavy hand on Echo's powerful shoulders, his voice breaking as he whispered, "We did it, partner. We brought him home." And as the storm began to ease and dawn threatened to break through the thinning clouds, Vincent realized something profound. This wasn't just justice, it was redemption. And for the first time in a long, long while, he could finally breathe again. The wind felt different now as it curled around the battered frame of the old bus stop on Fifth Avenue, softer somehow. No longer biting through his skin, but carrying with it a strange kind of peace Vincent had almost forgotten existed. He stood where this new life had begun, his shoulders no longer hunched by the crushing weight of regret, but squared with a quiet pride, his gaze steady as the city moved around him. Not with indifference this time, but with subtle recognition. People passed by, businessmen with their polished shoes, mothers holding the hands of wide-eyed children, the lost and the hopeful, and every so often a glance would linger just long enough to offer a silent nod, a small acknowledgement that something had changed, that maybe not every story in this city ended in sorrow. Beside him, Echo sat tall and still, his powerful form outlined by the fading glow of the setting sun, his ears perked forward, eyes calm but watchful, the perfect image of loyalty carved against the horizon. The city lights flickered on one by one as dusk painted the streets in strokes of gold and amber, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Vincent let the moment wash over him, without the constant pull of guilt dragging him back under. He reached down, his hand resting against Echo's strong neck, fingers brushing through the thick fur that had become his anchor through the darkest of nights. And he felt the steady rhythm of life beneath his palm, warm and real and unshakably present. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, the words wrapped in years of pain, but carried now on the wings of hard-won peace. "Let's go home, partner," he whispered, and those simple words felt heavier than a lifetime of empty promises. Echo stood as if he'd been waiting for that command all along, his tail giving a slow, deliberate wag before falling back into step beside Vincent. Together they walked into the glowing streets, the world unfolding ahead of them, not as a battlefield of lost chances, but as a road leading towards something more. A future not defined by failure, but by the courage it took to rise from it. And as they disappeared into the fading light side by side, a man once broken and a soldier reborn, the city seemed to hum with quiet approval, the streets whispering a simple truth that echoed far beyond the skyline. That even the most shattered souls, when given one more chance, can find their way back to the light.